Africa is said to have a significant shortage of specialized skills, and it's estimated that there could be a 75% increase in the use of expatriate staff over the next 3 years. In Nigeria, several surveys done to gauge sentiments of business owners on the availability of skilled workers have raised concerns about human capital development investments in Nigeria and indeed the rest of the continent. For more on the skills deficit in Nigeria, I'm now being joined in the studio by Austin Tam George, Dr. Austin Tam George, Executive Director of the Institute of Communication and Corporate Studies. Thank you so much, Austin, for taking the time out to join us. Now, obviously, this is a problem that's not just big for Nigeria, it's also a problem on the entire African continent. But for Nigeria, how big is this problem? It's
a big problem because, for our population, we need to have very large pool of specialized, manpower, but we don't seem to have that. What is responsible can be put in a historical context. For over 25 years or so, we were under military rule. And what the military did was to see centers of learning, no longer as centers of learning, but as centers of opposition. So the universities and other centers of learning that we are preparing expertise for the country, we are short most of the time. So the tendency was always for the military to see the institutions of learning as places that they had to attack as places of opposition. So what this meant was that there was a degradation of the learning environment. That's one part. The second part is that we also have a great deal of brain drain. There are over 1 million Nigerian professionals working in the US alone, 10 million around the world. So this is a fundamental problem, and except we get, to build our human capital, it's going to pose a
problem. How can we begin to attack it, very briefly?
First of all, we've got to make sure there is enough budgetary provision. UN standards say that we need to have at least 25% of our budget dedicated to education. We don't have that yet. And even when we have budget designated for educational purposes, the tendency is that finances are always not released. And of course, there's also the problem of corruption. So I think that we need to build our capacity, and that can only come when there is tremendous, commitment on the part
of funding. If in the absence of funding, what can we do, perhaps from the private sector perspective?
We need to have something like a framework where there will be a partnership between government and private sector participants to make sure that we build that. And what they can do is to do what you could call a skills audit, to know exactly what amount of people we have in particular skill areas, and to be sure whether these are areas they can focus on in terms of direct specific strategic investment.
Okay, what about, sorry to butt in again, because I know that there's some specialized sectors where we see a lot of expatriates, and not that it's a bad thing to have expatriates, but some believe that we could have locals also doing those jobs, perhaps in construction, oil and gas, telecoms.
Yes, we also have a problem of certification. We tend to place a lot of emphasis on certificates rather than on skill acquisition. For instance, you mentioned the oil sector, for instance. We've been operating the oil sector since 1958, but we still can't do turnaround maintenance. Every year, we have engineers coming from the gas sector, but we just can't have the technical expertise to do that. So what I think we need to do is to be able to invest in actual practical training. Out-of-school training still needs to be emphasized, but what you see these days is that there seems to be a tendency simply to go to university and get the certificates without actually acquiring the technical expertise that is needed on a sector-by-sector basis. And I think that both the private sector and the government can come together to say, look, certification aside, what can we do in terms of actually having hands-on training so that we build the kind of pool of expertise that the country needs.
Okay, very interesting subject, but we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much,
Thank you for having me.
Austin Tam George, Executive Director of the Institute of Communication and Corporate Studies here in Lagos.